Hello, this is Brigitte Hippel, and I will be doing the multi-currency webinar. And hopefully everybody can hear me okay and that there's not any issues there. I know that there was maybe a question about the time the webinar was displaying on the help guide, so hopefully everybody has the right time and is able to show up. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask. This really is kind of an overview of understanding how our multi-currency works, and even the ability to show you kind of what's coming up with GL company currencies that we've added some changes to. That's currently a beta item, so I'll be reviewing all of that. So welcome aboard. Don't hesitate to ask any questions. And if I'm going too fast at all, please don't hesitate to let me know. Hopefully I will be able to stop and answer your questions along the way. I really highly suggest that if you are getting ready or thinking about using multi-currency, that you will reach out to your account manager and set up a call with them. All right, let's get started. So in our help guide, of course, we have a very in-depth help guide on the details of multi-currency, from the overview of using multi-currency and some of the important information in here about currency rates and how things work, understanding realized gains, unrealized gains and losses, revaluations of accounts. And so you're going to hear those terms once you start to utilize multi-currency. And I'm not sure if everyone is currently already using it or if they are just kind of interested in seeing what happens with multi-currency. But these are some of the terms that we would definitely go into detail about, in making sure that you understand everything that you are seeing within the system. Okay. We do have detailed instructions about how to set this up. Now, to me, lots of times when I do a call with a client, there are always nuances. Maybe I'm only billing my client in a different currency, which we would call a foreign currency. Your own currency that you normally work in is what's considered your home currency. So lots of places, once you start using multi-currency, you're going to see either HC for your own home currency. We're generally always using, US dollars or the Canadian dollar, British pound, etc. And then anything foreign, whether it's GBP, the yen, the euro, those would be displayed with their currency ID. Okay. We also go through details about transactions, because there are differences on how vendor invoices work versus client invoices, because whatever you set your project up in, as far as the currency of the project, that is the currency that the client invoice will be in. Those two have to match. You cannot take a project in USD and then turn around and create a client invoice in GBP or British pounds for the same project. They must match. The opposite is true when we get to vendor invoices. My home currency may be USD. I'm billing my client in British pounds, but my vendor needs to be paid in euros. System handles that and tracks all of the information. What is billable at the project level, what is recorded at the home currency level for profit and loss statements, etc. Okay, so then we get into billing and payments, making sure, how do we receive those funds, what bank accounts they can go into, our AP and AR accounts, the payments that we make. Can we pay out of one bank account, even though it's my US bank account? Can I still create a GBP payment out of it? So a lot of detail that is in there. And then truly understanding what you're seeing in your reporting section, because financial reports are very different than what you're seeing in your project financial reports. So just kind of be aware that there's differences in the way that you're going to see things. And this is why I think our help guide is very good as far as being able to allow you to set yourself up excuse me, to use multi-currency. But on the other hand too, it's kind of nice to be able to do a separate training call, in order to go through all these differences and making sure that based on how you're going to be needing multi-currency and making sure that you're setting things up correct. All right, so let's go ahead and talk about system setup first. So this is when we're coming over to multi-currency and we start talking about all of the setup items. Now in Workamajig system setup, we have a few different areas in system setup that need to be enabled. And when you come to GL settings, GL tracking options, you must come down to multi-currency, okay? If this is not turned on, then you do not have any options to even select any other currencies. And we have a very long list of currencies that you can choose from, probably more than you will ever need. Once you turn this on, you actually designate what your home currency is. Okay, and that basically, if you've already been in the system, will take all your transactions, just similar to GL companies, and set that currency across the board for everything. Home currency, when you set yourself up, whether that home currency is Canadian dollars, US dollars, the British pound, doesn't matter, you're going to see it throughout your system as a blank currency, because the only place that currency is actually going to display in most places is when it's other than home. Okay, and you'll kind of see that as we go through this process. You will need to set up some additional GL accounts in order to do this. We have our realized gains and losses account, and we have a rounding adjustment account. Now, whether you make those the same accounts or you want them to be separate, of course, that's going to be up to you. For a lot of my clients, because they were already using multi-currency before, they had those specific accounts, and so it was an easy setup in their GL accounts. The realized gains and losses is really that ability to be able to determine, both on a client invoice and a vendor invoice, if I build my client for, let's say, 1,000 Canadian dollars on July 1st, and the value to me in US dollars, my home currency, would be, let's say, $975. But by the time the client actually paid the invoice, the client still paid 1,000 Canadian dollars. But the currency rate changed by the time that they paid me, and I ended up getting $980 instead of $975, the value to me in my home currency. That means I had a $5 realized gain. Now, of course, it could be a loss, it could be a gain, and it's a plus or minus that goes into the same account. Same thing would happen on the vendor side. I have a vendor invoice. I receive it on July 1st, but by the time I pay it, I'm supposed to pay my vendor in 1,000 euros. Value to me is 1,100 US dollars, but by the time I pay the vendor, the currency rate has changed and I still pay the vendor 1,000 euros, but the value now to me has changed and is, $1,105. So there's a realized loss for me based on the timing of when I paid. Rounding adjustment account has to do with those currency rates. Currency rates, I believe, are 6 digits to the right of the decimal, yet dollar amounts, no matter what currency we're talking about, is always only 2 digits. So when that amount, 1,000 yen, gets multiplied against that currency rate and giving the value in US dollars or Canadian dollars, there's going to be some rounding that happens, and that's what this rounding adjustment account is for. All right. You can determine the currencies that you're going to be possibly using, whether it's to pay a vendor or to bill a client. Maybe it's one side or maybe it's just the other, but you can click on this and you will see all of the currencies that we actually have in our system. Okay, so if you happen to be missing something and it's not in here, definitely let us know. But this is what sets the currencies that I'm using in the system. And it also does my currency rates for me. So when I come over to currency rates over here, you can see these are the same currencies that I've been working with. And daily, my rate comes in automatically. Now you can block to have the rates come in automatically. You can import your own list of rates if you want them in. I can look back in time and see what the rates were for last month. And so when I scroll down now, I'm also seeing June's. I have the ability to actually change the rate. Now, this is the rates that's coming in from the website that we use to get our currency rates. Doesn't mean you have to use them. Now, it might be that when you have a specific transaction, such as a journal entry when you're doing something with a bank, and a bank has their own currency rate, and they said, well, we've exchanged the funds, based on this rate. When you enter any transaction in the system, you have that ability to change the currency rate on that one transaction. So this is just what defaults in. This is what will default in on your transactions, but every single transaction, you'll be able to make those changes. All right. GL accounts. As part of that currency setup over here, you will need to set up separate AR, AP, or credit card accounts. Now, if you're only billing your client in a different currency, you don't need AP accounts. Same way, the opposite is for the opposite. If I never bill a client in a different currency, but I'm only paying my vendors in different currencies, then again, I don't need an AR account. These are just the ones that if you are doing something in a foreign currency, you would need your own AP account, AR account, and or credit card account. You don't have to set up bank accounts in a different currency. Many of my clients have one bank account that they do everything out of. I have others that say, well, it's easier for us to have a US bank and a Canadian bank, and we do everything out of that bank. Okay, so in that system setup, when we come to GL accounts, you now have a currency field. So when you, oops, where's my currency field? There, no, oh, there it is, currency. Of course, just like with anything within the system, once you have transaction posted to that account, you can no longer change the currency on it. Now it's read those transactions, or depending on what you're putting into that, as a Canadian account. Okay. Same thing when I come down and I look at my accounts receivable accounts. Once again, I have my currency field. Okay, so I have different AR accounts for the different clients that I bill in different currencies. And I also have my AP accounts where I will bill out different vendors out in different currencies. Sorry, lost my train of thought there. All right. And of course, my realized gain account, so I have my realized gain account, and then I have my rounding account. Whoops. What did I put my rounding account under? Rounding adjustment account. How you set those up is up to you, but those will be needed for that GL tracking option to be able to enable multi-currency. All right. One last thing about system setup is under billing options, services. Okay. More than likely, the rates that you have under your standard services may not apply when you're billing a client in a different currency. I cannot probably use the same 135 rate for account management if I happen to be billing in GBP. It may be a completely different rate that I would have to use there. And so in that instance, I would be using service rate sheets. Okay. The thing to remember about service rate sheets is it is just a number. There is no currency attached to either services or service rate sheets. It just says account management 130. It is the currency on the project that determines that this rate is a foreign currency or not. So if the project is set up as Canadian, then this 130 is 130 Canadian dollars. If my project is set up as US, Even though this is called a Canadian rate sheet, it is still then 130 US dollars. So these are simply numbers. It is the project that determines whether that's Canadian dollars, foreign currency, home currency, that type of thing. Okay. All right. Any questions so far? Doesn't look like it. So let us talk about our clients. Billing, coming over to clients. When we look at our foreign currency clients, you will see that in your client record, you have now the ability to set a currency and that default AR account, the labor rate, and the labor rate sheet. Now, when I set the currency up on this project defaults here and set the currency, that's just saying that when I create a project, I generally probably want that project being billed in GBP. Now, like any other project defaults, once I create the project and it defaults in the currency on the project, I can still change it until once I have transactions. Once I have transactions on it, that currency is locked. But this is just a default. Doesn't mean that I always have to bill my client in that. This is where I set my service rate sheets, same as if I had different rate sheets and we only billed in our home currency. And then under billing, this is where I would set the accounts receivable account. I need my accounts receivable account to match the currency of my invoice. So that must be a 1-for-1 match. The currency on this accounts receivable is the same as the currency on my project. So when my client invoice goes out, the accounts receivable account on the currency on that account matches the currency on the project. Okay. Same or similar, I should say, will apply with the vendors. Now, vendors don't generally have a default. Well, they have a default, but it's not for project purposes. So I have my vendors, I have a currency field, and then I have the default AP account on that. So when I click into my Canadian and I look at the purchasing defaults, here's where the AP account is. Here's where the currency is. Once again, the currency on my AP account must match the currency that I'm paying my vendor. Now, does my vendor ever want to be paid in different currencies? They can be. I can set that on when I add the next vendor invoice. Do I want to pay them in GBP, Canadian dollars, or the Japanese yen? I can do any of those so long as I have the accounts payable account currency matching. All right. You know, with multi-currency, it's details. Everything is in the details. Understanding what the rules are, understanding what it does. It really works all in the background. It works very well. It's just knowing what you're seeing where and what is possible. Okay. So if we go and look at a project, I have a project here in my project settings. In my accounting tab, I have the currency. As you can see, I can no longer change it. That means I have actual transactions on this project that have locked this currency field down. So when I go to bill this client, I will actually be billing them in British pounds. Okay. When you enter anything in on the project now, everything on this project, all of the numbers that you are seeing in the project snapshot, the amounts, the estimate, the budget screen, they are all now in British pounds. Okay. Excuse me. So when I'm looking at any of the numbers, you can see that there's a currency field. Now, this may change things when you are looking at, let's say, your active projects page and you pull in all of your currency or all of your budget information or amounts billed, and you got that great grand total at the bottom. Now you really probably want to group or sort by currency because you cannot add up 21,450 GBP to a project that's maybe in USD and have those numbers make sense. So grand totals, when you're looking at, let's say, an active projects page, you will now have to take things into consideration that what you're looking at is really in a different currency. So here, when I'm looking at amounts, it tells me this project is in GBP. That means that is 21,450 British pounds. Okay, I cannot look at it at the same time I'm looking at a project that has USD or home currency values. Okay. The estimate is in British pounds. The snapshot is all now. So of course, it's always going to show you, when I do any billing, it's all going to be in British pounds. The difference is going to be when I get to the project profitability. My home currency is USD. That's what I file my taxes in. USD, my corporate P&L, my balance sheet, and everything is run in USD. So when I'm looking at the P&L basically in the project, or even running the client P&L and the project P&L, I am actually looking at things now in USD. So it does what we call a revaluation. Okay, and it looks at every single transaction. It knows the value of, if I put in $1,000 GBP, but the value in USD based on this currency rate on this specific date is 975. Those are the types of numbers that you're going to see here. And you'll be able to see all that drill down once you start to create these transactions, whether it's a client invoice, vendor invoice, the P&L, the aging, you're going to be able to see all these details in here, how it is doing that even in any of the posting details. Okay. So that's the project. When you're looking at something within the project, it's now going to be in that currency. If we want to go ahead and add a vendor invoice, okay, to this project. Now, this project is in British pounds. My home currency is USD. But if I go and add a vendor invoice in here and I say, it's my Euro client, that's going to be working in euros rather than British pounds. If you notice, it's coming up with the exchange rate for today. It's using today's invoice date, not the posting date. It doesn't care when you post it to your general ledger. It's looking at the invoice date. So if I were to change the invoice date and change it to last week, so we're at 1.015. If I change it to last week, it now changed it to 1.012. Not a huge difference, but it is looking at the dates within here. Okay, so if I set those invoice dates, and I'll put in, we'll call it 7/19/22. If I put it to this project, so this vendor wants to be paid in euros. So if you notice, I'm not sure why that's coming up. I've got the wrong account in there. Accounts payable euro. There we go. Sorry. It wants to be paid in euros, but the client is going to be billed out in GBP. So if I go ahead and put the project in here and whoops, BCA and 092, and we're going to say it was printing, of course, and the vendor is charging me $1,200. Okay, so if I go ahead and save this and it's based on this rate, you'll see that the system tells you automatically what the currency rate was, that the currency of this vendor is to be paid in euros. But since a vendor invoice can have multiple lines, you really have to look at the line detail to see what's happening on the project. So the project knows it's GBP. And it says, okay, you may have to pay the vendor $1,200, but the project net and gross, without a markup in here, I'm trying to keep things simple, is in GBP is $1,117. So this is the amount that would be billed out to the client in GBP. This is the amount that would be paid out to the vendor in euro. Okay. Now, if I approve this and I post this, the posting detail is always interesting, and it takes a while to make sure that you've set up your posting detail, that it makes sense, and that you have all the fields that you need to pull in. So this kind of becomes a lot. So I've got my accounts payable and my cost of goods. This is the vendor currency. The vendor is to be paid in 1,200 euros, and that's what's on his accounts payable. Home currency here, for me, the value, if I had to pull that out of my US bank account to get this vendor paid, would be 1,215 US dollars. Okay, and here's the exchange rate that it does. And then of course you see the billable amount in GBP. So again, understanding what you're seeing within the details. Now, if you decide to turn on multi-currency, one of the big things I always stress is go into your system settings for both the posting detail and the general ledger and edit the columns to bring in those additional fields called debit home currency, credit home currency, because debit and credit is the transaction currency. Debit home currency and credit home currency is your home currency values. Okay, and you want to make sure, and you can even bring in what the exchange rate was and be able to see that within the system. Okay, so this is your home currency, this is the transaction currency. So if we've got this vendor invoice on this project and we have some other transactions in here, so if I come over to billing, I now have a miscellaneous cost that I need to bill. I've got that vendor invoice, but if you notice, there's the gross to the vendor or to the client. This would all be in GBP. And then I've got some time entries. So if I go ahead and bill all these transactions, and let's do billing item and item just so we can see the detail. Once again, here's all the information. The client is being billed in GBP. The client currency rate is coming in based off today's invoice date. So if I had actually set up the invoice date to be sooner than today, so it's 1.205, if I set it back and said, hey, you know, we were billing the client back on 7/22, and let's set the posting date to be the same. And if you notice, it's got, here's the GBP, here's the currency rate. So if I had to make any changes to the currency rate, you can. It's what defaults in from your currency rates, but can always be changed. And of course, down here is my accounts receivable account. So I need to make sure that that matches the currency on my invoice. And I say yes. So it kind of changes. And now, so if I were to bill do I have tax on here? So if I were to bill the client and it's using the currency rate on 7/22, if I go ahead and approve, and if I post, once again, in those posting details, I see very similar things. I've got the client side, that would be GBP, because the client is being billed in GBP. Here's the amounts going to my various income accounts. Here's my home currency values, okay, based on this currency rate. All right. Once again, when I look at the project and I look at project financials, up here I see what was billed to the client in GBP, but in project profitability, I actually see the revenue based on home currency. Okay. I know it's kind of a lot to take in, a lot of numbers, a lot of looking at stuff. It's just kind of making sure that along the way, you've got your information set up so that it makes sense from what you're looking at. Now, before we go over to the accounting tab, one of the things I want to talk about is if we go to everyone and the report center. So this becomes very important to understand when you look at, and this kind of goes along with that active projects page. When I look at project financials, and I know one of the reports I love to show is the project budget analysis report. You now on that project budget analysis report have a currency field. Blank equals your home currency. So if I run this, I will see every project that is in my home currency. If I want to see what is done in Canadian dollars, and if I just say, let's go for this month and hide projects with a 0, then what I'm seeing is everything on this page is based on GBP. So the dollar amounts that you're seeing, the revenue, the COGS, everything is understanding what happened in GBP. And this is really meant to be that if the account manager or project manager is talking to the client, they're talking to them in their currency. They're not saying, well, let me give you the converted home currency because it matters to me what's in USD. No, it's more what matters to the client. So I need to be able to discuss with the client what's done in this currency. Okay. All of these projects or all of these report here in the project financials is going to be based, when they're talking dollar amounts, are going to be based on the currency of that project. Okay, it's not mixing and matching. I cannot run the project budget analysis report and throw all my projects together because we're talking apples and oranges. On the other hand, when we get to financial reports, we're actually going to be looking at the home currency because those are my taxes. I need to be able to run my corporate P&L in my home currency. And this is where revaluations come in and that type of thing. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at the Accounting Today page. Interesting thing about AP aging and AR aging, and yes, I am completely out of balance, but when you run either the AR aging or the AP aging, once again, you have now a currency field, because the thought is that if I'm talking to a client about the fact that they still owe me on a client invoice, I need to talk to them in their currency. So if I were to run this and say, show me all my Canadian dollar invoices that are still open, and then when I run this report, that is actually going to show these in Canadian dollars. However, I can see the value if everybody paid their client invoices today, based on today's date, with today's currency rate, this is how much I would get. 20,743 in US dollars. So once again, you know, if I run this report for a different date and I come back to July 1, the currency rate changes and I generate on the screen, the value is also going to change because it's going based on you're looking as of a specific date. I'm going to go and grab the currency rate for that date, and I'm going to tell you what the value is if all of these were paid in one day. Okay. Same thing happens with the AP aging. We've got a currency rate field, so you select your AP and you select your currency, and when you generate this, notice that once again, you've got your currency rate, and that's really just to revalue up here in the corner to say, okay, once again, if you were to pay all your vendor invoices and you had to pull the money out of your bank account, your US bank account, what would the value of that be? You still are paying the vendor 1,000 euros, but the value to me would be this. Okay. Now, again, you can still, you know, look at your vendor invoices. You've got what those are and what that would be. Okay. If we go and talk about payments or, you know, doing a receipt. So if we get the receipt for my BCA client, okay, now you really have to be careful on which checking account, because this is going to default in my cash checking account. So maybe I do have a separate, you know, foreign currency account that I want to use, or maybe I want to pay it out of my US account. You have that option. I'm going to go ahead and keep things simple for me for right now. I'm going to put it out of the cash account. And I think, let me see, which GL company was this? Accounting, it was company A. Okay. Let's see, didn't I have, oh, not Euro checking. It was GBP, right? British pound, and receipt currency is British pound. there's my invoice. Okay, so that you need to know what receipt am I putting this to, the currency of the receipt, but I can have a different bank account. I can pay it out of my US account, but I'm, receiving the money from my British client and putting it into my US account. So if the client pays 16302, come on, 0.22. All right. And we go ahead and apply that. 163022. Yep. All right. Once again, it's using my receipt date to come up with the exchange rate. Now, my client's invoice date was originally on 7/22. There will be a very slight difference in the exchange rate by the time the client pays it, and that will either cause a realized gain or a realized loss. So if I save this, whoops, one save, and hopefully I haven't used that before. And again, so it tells you that the receipt currency is GBP. It knows your bank account is also GBP, so it's recognizing that. It's showing you the exchange rate for today's date. So again, if I need to change the exchange rate, I can. Okay. And when I post this, and I look at the posting details, so this is where your eyes start to glaze over, okay? What did I do? How did I get an unapplied amount on post? I must have had I did. My receipt amount was wrong. 1630. There we go. I knew that the number looked wrong. You guys are all probably screaming at the thing and saying this is wrong. Okay, so there we go. Post looks a lot better. Wouldn't have such a gigantic come in. So this is what went into the British bank account. This is what got relieved out of the British accounts receivable. On the US side, my home currency side, this is the value based on this currency rate. If they had paid us on the date that they actually owed, that we sent out the invoice, there was now a difference. So we actually have a realized gain of $15.45 because the currency rate changed. By the time we got paid, the value went up. That caused a realized gain. We had a little bit of a rounding adjustment because of all these exchange rates. All right. Accounting, let's kind of just quickly talk about accounting in here. Again, same type of thing. If I go and look at any of the drill down information, you want to make sure that you set your settings to display everything that needs to be. Oops, there it goes. I've got what's the currency, what's the debit and credit in that transaction. Then I've got the values in home currency. So we're always tracking that. You can always see it. You don't have to go and look at the posting detail of every single invoice or transaction that you put in. We're actually tracking that on each invoice. Okay. Then we're also showing you what is the value based on today's rate of looking at your accounts receivable GBP account. Be the same thing if you went to the aging, it's calculating the exact same thing. So we're always showing you the calculations along the way of what you should be seeing. Okay. When it comes to running your corporate P&L or financial reports, these are all done in home currency. So when I go to run my corporate P&L, doesn't matter that it's my Canadian company and I run this, the numbers or the values that I'm going to see are going to be based on the currency rate exchange of today. So if I run this, whoops, not today, single date range. Oh, that's why, hang on. So let me do, it was company A. And oh, I shouldn't have done all. Okay. So what it will do is for any of my accounts in here that might have been a different currency, it revalues those amounts all to US. You see that better actually in your balance sheet. So when we run the balance sheet, and I run this for company A, and I run this. So again, here's those currency rates. So I've got a British pounds. This is now valued in USD, because you have to be able to add your balance sheet up to get to that bottom grand total number. It revalues the amounts. So if you were to click into the field, so let's go back up to my Euro checking account. Okay. It takes the transactions, takes the balances, takes the currency rate, and then this is how it calculates what the revalue is. So when you see that in the help guide and it talks about it's revaluing it, it's just saying, hey, when I'm running this balance sheet, I need to put them all into one currency, and they're all going into US. And so I'm going to revalue the amount that's in there, because normally everything that's in your Canadian accounts receivable account is Canadian dollars. All right. Last thing is we have a new change coming. It's called multi-currency for GL companies. So that's the ability to be able to come into your system, go to GL settings, come to GL companies, and actually set up a GL company with its own currency. So I've got a GL company here, and it has its own currency value to it. Now with this on, I can actually go and run the balance sheet and corporate P&L in that currency. So if I come down to the balance sheet and I say, I just want to run it for my Canadian company, and I say done, I can run it in my US, my home currency. That's my total of my instance runs in USD, or I can say I'd actually run it in my Canadian currency. I'd like to see the numbers in Canadian currency because I have to file information to Canada, and this is that ability to be able to provide that conversion. Okay, so anyone have any questions? I know that there's not, unless you're using the system, it's kind of a lot of information to take in. Wasn't really sure how detailed I should go, but it's also kind of understanding the extent that our multi-currency works within Workamajig is quite detailed, and it's quite a lot of information that you can gain within the system. So, and to me, we're constantly making upgrades and changes and enhancements, as you know, to other places, including now multi-currency. Oh, last thing, for those who, I see the question. For one other thing before I get to your question is the revenue forecast. If I look at the revenue forecast in here, and I can look at it when I look at it for all, I'm actually seeing it in my home currency. Okay, these are revalued numbers, even though this is a Canadian project. Canadian amounts, it's been revalued to US. However, if I go ahead and say, well, I'd like to see just my Canadian projects and my Canadian revenue forecast, now it changes them back to what's actually on the project. And this is 17,865 Canadian dollars. So even our our revenue forecast has the ability to do currency. Okay, but if you run it for all, it's going to revalue everything to home currency. If you run it for its currency, it will actually display it in that currency. When will GL company multi-currencies be out of beta? It's just recently went into beta. We've been kind of running it in the background now to just make sure that, everything's looking good. If you're interested in trying it, I'd be more than happy to enable it for you. And what it's really doing is you have to have a new GL company. Any existing GL companies that you already have set up are automatically defaulted to whatever your home currency is. So you need to set up that new GL company with that new currency, and then the system will track all of that information in the background. Okay, so In fact, if I come, close that. If I come over to accounting, general ledger, and I come down to the balance sheet, and I want to run it for my Canadian company, and I do a conversion to USD when I run this. So what happens now is, of course, now I'm looking at these values in Canadian dollars. When I do the drill down, you will now have a couple extra fields in here. So we have the currency, or the transaction currency. So these were done in Canadian dollars. This is the values in US dollars, your home currency, okay? Debits and credits, home currency, transaction currency. And then over here, we have the GL company currency, which may not be the same as your transaction currency. You may be a GBP GL company paying, billing a client in euros. And so the transaction currency may be different. Home currency may be USD, company currency may be CAD, and then we have the values for debits and credits in the home currency. So basically what we've done is tracked a couple of extra calculations in there to say, well, if I decide I want to run this by my company's currency, I can pull these numbers. If I'm running it as in typical my home currency, I'm pulling these numbers, but I can always see what did I bill or pay to my clients and vendors. Okay. All right. Any other questions? Hopefully this information made sense. I know, again, a lot of detail. If you are considering it, don't hesitate to review our multi-currency help guide. A lot of information is in here. We talk about where we get our currency rates from, how we revalue on balance sheets, managing your currency exchange rates. So you've got that ability now to do bank-to-bank transfers from one currency to another, and be able to set whatever the currency rate is, either what's defaulting into your system or maybe what the bank gave you as their currency rate. All right. I appreciate you guys all being part of this webinar, and let me know if you do have any questions. Thank you, guys.